Well, hello and welcome to this review of Pop OS, an operating system I've been using for a little while now. Normally what I like to try and do is try a Linux distribution for about 2 months or so before I throw up a review on it. Had a little bit of an issue with Pop OS, not really so much the operating system itself. I actually had actual hardware failure. So I wanted to give Pop OS a little bit of a fair run. So basically, once I had my SSD replaced, I reinstalled Pop OS and I was able to play with it. I don't know, for a little while. I was able to get quite a bit of, gaming in on it and, usage over several months basically. Well, I wouldn't say several months, probably about between the two times using it, I'd say probably about between 3 and 4 months I've actually used Pop. So probably a little bit longer than I actually really wanted to, but I was also in the middle of playing both the Bloodstained Curse of the Moon games, and I didn't want to, break up the back-to-back playing of those two games by doing a review of this and then, reinstalling a different operating system to try next. So I gave Pop OS probably a bit of a more fair shake, if you will, but I think I gave it definitely a good run there to get my thoughts on it and to basically say how I feel about it. So for starters, I have the NeoFetch information pulled up on Pop OS, and it does kind of give you a lot of information about the operating system and how Pop OS has diverged from its parent distribution, Ubuntu. And it has diverged in quite a few significant ways. For starters, and the thing you can probably see right there at the very top, most notably, is the kernel. Now, this is based off of Ubuntu 22.04, but one of the things that Pop OS did is they continually released new kernel updates, and it was pretty frequent, actually. So Ubuntu 22.10, which literally just came out like days ago, is actually on 5.19. But the Ubuntu 22.04 that this is based off of, I believe, is still running kernel 5.15. So that's significant for quite a few reasons. Basically, one of the things you can probably have a little more faith with Pop OS is its ability to support newer hardware more quickly, because they weren't waiting around for the next version of Ubuntu to come out before they pushed newer kernels. Now, I don't think they're pushing the absolute latest kernel, but they are pretty frequent with their updates, and they do keep it, way more quickly than your standard Ubuntu distribution. So that is a big benefit. And I can say personally for me, as you can tell, I'm running an NVIDIA GPU. I installed the NVIDIA drivers, and never once did I have an issue with updating the kernel. And I believe I started off on like 5.16 was the original kernel that Pop OS came installed with. And so from 5.16 all the way up to 5.19, I never had a single issue with a kernel upgrade, which is pretty significant when you're running an NVIDIA hardware, because it can cause issues because of how integrated the NVIDIA drivers are with the kernel. But not once did I have an issue with that, so I do want to point that out. And for those who do use NVIDIA hardware, it is a comforting feeling, to say the least. And that's basically a huge benefit all across the board, basically, from a hardware perspective. So definitely something to keep in mind. Another huge difference with Pop OS and Ubuntu is that, well, it's a huge difference when this came out. Pop OS 22.04 started using the Pipewire audio system in place of Pulse audio. And why I say that was a big thing when this came out was because Ubuntu 22.04 and its derivatives were still using Pulse audio, to the best of my knowledge. Now, how you feel about the pulse audio versus pipe wire debate, that's kind of up in the air. For me, I feel that pipe wire, it works. It's an audio subsystem, basically. Um, there are commands that you can use to get echo cancellation, which I need for my microphone, to cancel out the fan noise of the computer nearby, which can be pretty, it can pick it up pretty well otherwise. And I do believe that the echo cancellation with Pipewire works really good. What I haven't had a chance to test out yet is how well I can get my MIDI hardware to play with Pipewire. And that's something I had I had a lot of commands and things down pat and how to do that with Pulse Audio. And I'm not exactly sure if that's something that I can do with Pipewire. Then again, that's not exactly a common need for a lot of people, so it may not be something that really bothers you in the end. At the end of the day, depending on your preferences for audio subsystem, it is worth noting that this version of Pop! OS has Pipewire. Now, Ubuntu has since, with 22.10, I believe they've also moved to the Pipewire framework, if you will. So, not a lot of difference now that Ubuntu is kind of caught up to Pop! OS, but that's one thing you can tell is it seems that Pop! OS is moving at a quicker pace for certain things than the parent distribution in this instance. And if you like having a little more cutting edge technology, but maybe not moving at the speed of something like, say, an Arch-based distribution, that's definitely something to consider for Pop! OS, and it's actually a pretty interesting and probably big benefit for you if that's something that you need. Obviously, from looking at the rest of this stuff, my hardware isn't exactly cutting edge anymore. It hasn't been cutting edge for a while, but that's okay. And another difference that I do want to talk about with Pop! OS and Ubuntu, and once again, this is a fairly recent announcement. Pop! OS has decided to abandon the 6-month release cycle that Ubuntu uses. From me following stuff on DistroWatch, Pop! OS usually came out pretty much not long after Ubuntu had a brand new release. And so it's not like you would have to wait months and months for a new Pop! OS release when a new Ubuntu release came out. But now they've decided to go to a yearly release cycle, and I don't actually think that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, actually, to give them a year to really clean things up and probably give a better, let me center this actually. There we go. Give a better desktop look. And there's probably a really good reason for that. One of the big reasons is right now you see they're running the GNOME desktop environment for Pop! OS, but the thing they've been talking about for quite a while is their move to a Cosmic desktop environment, which is going to be something that they are going to build on their own using the Rust programming language. Now, I'm not a programmer, so I can't really speak to the pros or cons of using the Rust programming language, but GNOME used the GTK toolkit. So from a programmer perspective, you may have a negative or a positive feeling for that because of how the actual desktop environment is going to change moving forward. My assumption, and it could be completely wrong, but my assumption is that they're going to probably try to keep this basic layout for their Cosmic desktop, but to the best of my knowledge, right now they're only in an alpha state for the Cosmic desktop. I don't think they've even hit beta yet, but I could be wrong about that. But it probably won't have the Cosmic desktop environment in full circulation until the next release, which I'm assuming will be roughly around April next year. But, that's once again an assumption on my part, so it could be wrong. There's another big difference that you can tell from looking at this NeoFetch layout. You can tell that I've got over 2,000 packages via the repositories and 21 Flatpak packages. What you see missing is one of the things that Ubuntu has been criticized by certain people within the Linux community. I don't really have a stance one way or the other yet on this, but they've been criticized, Ubuntu has, I should say, has been criticized for the over-reliance on snap packages for a lot of their packaging sources, basically. And Pop! OS, from what I can tell, has abandoned the snap format in favor of Flatpak, which seems to be a format that seems to be a little bit more widely accepted outside of the Ubuntu ecosystem. And when I say Ubuntu, I mean like the direct Ubuntu and the Ubuntu community distributions that are heavily tied in with Ubuntu, that are, basically the same company, Canonical. So outside of those, many Ubuntu derivatives and a lot of the other types of Linux distributions have been pushing Flatpak pretty heavily. And so if you are a proponent of Flatpak, then Pop! OS is basically a big pusher of Flatpak as well. So I actually don't mind Flatpak, and I do want to point a few things out with the Flatpak packages. They've done a good job of integrating the theming, for the most part, with the Flatpaks. Previously, I had tried out Zorin OS as a good example. And Zorin OS, when you had a Qt-based application that was a Flatpak, it clashed heavily with the theming. So here's a good example. This is the Citra emulator, which I used to play Shin Megami Tensei 4, probably about a month ago or a little over that. And basically you can tell that it is going along with the dark theming that I have running currently with Pop! OS. And I'll get to the theming here in a minute. But you can see it doesn't clash. It's not running the light theme. So it seems like they're pretty decent about integrating Flatpak a little bit better with the theming than, say, Zorin OS was. But that's not always the case. I mean, this is Ocular, which is probably one of my preferred PDF viewers. It's also Qt based. I wouldn't say it is jarring. I think it does kind of fit the theming to a certain extent, but I don't think it's, full on with the dark theming. So I wouldn't say that everything works perfectly with the Flatpak and theming, but I will say that they do a better job of it than some other distributions I've used so far. So that's definitely a good point, I think, to make. I believe also AVI Demux is a video editing program I use, and I believe it also uses Qt. I don't know if I installed the Flatpak version or the repository version, though, off the top of my head. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out because that is it's a big benefit. They're doing a good job of integrating the theming and whatnot. In fact, let me go ahead and pull up the Pop Shop real quick. This is basically, I believe originally this software center came out on the Elementary OS, and the Pop! OS team decided to adopt that as their method of, package installation. And so they're pretty decent about being able to find software, but they do, what's the word I want to use here? They curate the amount of packages that are in the Pop Shop. So pretty much everything that's in the repositories, for instance, won't necessarily be listed here in the Pop Shop. but you can go down by different categories and whatnot here. So let's fun and games. Why not? So let's go to fun and games, pull it up. So looking through the fun and games section, for instance, I basically found it kind of an interesting feature of the Pop Shop, to say the least. Let's look at like this game here. You have Battle for West Noth, which I do remember playing back in the game. Oh, okay, fine. Go ahead and pull it up. So you'll notice that one of them that I clicked on, it says your option is to pull from FlatHub as a flat pack. Whereas the other one, if you click on it, it's just going to be pulling from the repositories. So you can see what, actually they don't really have the version. It says other apps buy this. So you can get a little more information basically sometimes depending on the package down here as to what version it is. Okay, so this says version 1.16.6. So this being the flat pack version is a little bit newer. So 1.16.6. Whereas they don't really list the version of the repositories, do they? Interesting. But I think that's kind of an interesting feature, if you will, of the Pop Shop, whereas it doesn't always list like, well, you know what? Let's search for a doesn't even tell me what version I have installed. But you know, it sometimes lists programs twice if it has both versions of the Flatpak and the repository version, which can be, I guess, confusing for new users to a certain extent, especially those people who aren't familiar with Linux and don't really know what the difference is between a Flatpak and a normal package. So I kind of wish that they would explain that better and possibly maybe just integrate it into one listing. I think that's something that could probably be done better in the future for Pop Shop. If you see the updates here, well, it doesn't say update. It says installed and it has a little circle if it sees updates. Most of these, if not all of these, are Flatpak format, basically. The ones that are the updates that are repository based are here under your operating system updates. And you can see it's got, well, I haven't updated in, I don't know, it hasn't been that long. It's been less than a week since I updated, and there's already 110 components with updates. So they do keep things updated pretty frequently. In fact, if we go past all these libs, and I'm seeing lib NVIDIA in there, which makes me think there's probably a kernel update. Yep, there is. Linux generic. Wow, okay. You know, not keeping up with the Joneses, they've moved on to the Linux 6.0 kernel. So yes, even newer than what I was showing you there in my NeoFetch background. So they definitely have consistently putting out new kernel updates. And like I said, you can see every time there's a kernel update, it usually has NVIDIA packages to go along with it so that the NVIDIA drivers get integrated into the kernel quite seamlessly. So it's actually really, really cool. Linux Image 6.0.2. So they definitely are constantly keeping things up to date. And speaking of NVIDIA drivers, by default, it had the NVIDIA driver 510 installed, but I was able to go in here and select the 515 driver. So I was able to get a newer driver via the Pop Shop as well, which is a nice, nice touch, basically. So this is the Pop Shop. It's pretty decent. I do like the layout and basically the ease of use for the most part. I was able to figure out the differences between Flatpak and the repositories pretty easily, but there are some interesting aspects. Like sometimes it wants to give you the flat pack as the preferred. Like when it had Steam listed here, it actually wanted to install the flat pack version of Steam rather than the repository version. I'm not really sure why. And I had to basically go in there and find the repository version of Steam rather than the flat pack. Because, I mean, depending upon the software program you're using, I don't always like to use the flat pack. And for me, I think Steam is best done via the repository version. That's just my own personal opinion. But yeah, that's the Pop Shop. So, users will use this fairly frequently because you're getting updates pretty much all the time, and you're going to want to look for and install different software programs. And so, from that perspective, it's a good solution because the search works great. And I do feel that the curated apps, even though it's not as much as what you could say pull from the repository directly, I think they do a pretty good job of curating things, and they give you a good choice. And just browsing the categories down here is another very good touch. So I do think the Pop Shop is good. It needs a little bit of work, but not a lot. It's still pretty decent. A very good, software update center. Now, I've been talking about theming for a little bit, so I do want to touch on that real quick. So this is the settings menu, and you see they've got a whole bunch of different options here on the left. The big one that I think most people, and I think even Pop, when you first install, the first thing they show you is the desktop section. And you can modify it to fit your needs to a certain extent. One of the things that I'm personally not a huge fan of is the two different taskbars. I personally would have just liked to have everything that's there in the top right down here in the bottom right, and the applications, I guess rather than say applications, maybe a little icon, but I can live with applications. But you can click on it there to bring up the applications, or you can also click on it there. And they do a pretty decent job of, as you can tell, dividing things up a little bit. And you can also create your own folder and move things. But this is literally just standard GNOME right here as far as the applications menu. But they give you a start menu, for lack of a better word, to launch it. And if you don't want it up here, you can turn it off. Like here, I can, bloop, there you go. There's no applications there anymore. I'm not one of these people that uses a lot of workspaces, so I got rid of the workspaces button. But if you're someone who does like to use workspaces, that's a feature that you can also have turned off or on. But that's for the top bar. You can also see down here, I think by default, they did not have a maximize button. If I remember correctly, by default, they didn't have that. So it's something I was able to turn on, which is pretty decent. You can change the super key action button. So like, well, never mind. Maybe it doesn't like my super key. That's fine. I don't like it either. These are some of the default backgrounds. In fact, I'm just running the default background that they have here with Pop that it comes with. This is what you'll see when you install Pop OS. But they do have a selection of other backgrounds that may or may not appeal to you. The cosmic background. Some pretty decent backgrounds here. I do like having different options, but for the most part, a lot of this like abstract art and things is not something that really appeals to me. I do like stuff like this, a little more natural scenery. So there's some of those in there as well. But, they have a wide range of backgrounds for people to try out. Now, where'd that one go? There it is. But theming is probably one of the things my biggest issue currently with Pop! OS is you have an option between dark and light. And one of the themes I downloaded that I had used on Zorin OS doesn't work anymore because with GNOME 42 they changed how themes work, and so old themes no longer work with the newer GNOME. And I mean, maybe I could have looked into it more, but it's just one of those things is like if I have to put in a lot of effort to get a theme installed, you're really kind of defeating the purpose. And I do like the dark theme. Here, let me, for comparison purposes, here's what the light theme looks like. And you'll notice one thing about the light theme. The taskbar itself is still pretty dark. So let me open up Firefox here. So it's very hard to distinguish between the top taskbar and the top bar for whatever application you're using. It's sometimes very hard to see the difference there, regardless of whether or not you're running dark or light. That was an interesting touch there, though. When I swapped to light, it actually changed my background. I thought that was kind of interesting. I never noticed that before. But anyway, the dark theme, it's pretty good, but it's a little bit too dark, at least for me. I would like something a little more in the gray range. And at this point in time, that's not something that really is easily done. Hopefully, when they do introduce the Cosmic Desktop, they will have better theming. In fact, I do believe that theming is probably one of the big reasons why they decided to start working on their own desktop environment. So I do hope that's something that when the Cosmic Desktop does come out, that they will be able to make it a little bit more easy to work with themes and have people in the community be able to provide themes so that you're not limited to basically light or dark and that's it. And if you don't like either one of them, well, you're kind of out of luck. Well, that's where we're at right now with Pop, though, so that is something to keep in mind. If this seems too dark to you, well, that's basically what you've got to do with. Otherwise, you're going to have to do a little more hunting and pecking to figure out how to make things a little less dark. Now, I did try installing GNOME Tweaks, and GNOME Tweaks, it does install, but it doesn't let you change things that I was able to change before in, say, Zorin OS. Once again, that's not me casting aspersions on the GNOME Tweaks tool. It's just GNOME in general. And they've really locked down a lot of certain things, like you're not allowed to change the appearance of the GNOME shell. So that's it's a bit of a bummer, but that's kind of why System 76 has moved to making their own desktop environment. So until that desktop environment comes out, this is one of the things you'll probably have to deal with from an appearance perspective. The dock has its own button, so you can actually add things to the dock pretty easily just by coming in here. Or you can also go into here and let's add text editor. Now it's down there and it's been pinned to the dash bar, or to the dock, excuse me. So that's something you can do pretty easy to modify your dock. Now, I mean, it's got here enable dock or disable dock. And I mean, I like the dock. Like I just said before, though, I really wish that both these, the dock and the taskbar, are really integrated into one bar. That would have been better, I think. If you like the Mac OS X look, you can basically have it just centered there, and it gets bigger as more applications open up. I personally just extend it all the way out. But yeah, you've got a lot of options in here to change the dock. I will say that it seems rather large to me, even when you click on the small thing there. It says 36px. I guess that's pixel, I guess. Yeah, 36 pixels. Seems a little bit large, but you get used to it after a while. And you can change the position as well here. You bottom of the screen, or you can put it on the left or the right side. Oops, by clicking the button. But at the same time, if you do that, you still have this top taskbar. Not my personal preference for the dock, but that is how they do things with System 7 with GNOME with Pop! OS. So keep that in mind from a visual aesthetic. That's what you're going to be dealing with for the most part. So yeah, that's pretty much the desktop setting. Everything else is pretty much standard, settings menu. You've got your Wi-Fi. For me, basically, I have two different wireless adapters I can use. I do want to point this out. This is really neat for me. I feel that my TP-Link wireless adapter that I have plugged into the computer, I had it so I could get those faster AC speeds. It says AC 600. This is the first Linux distribution that I've used where that works flawlessly. And for that reason alone, I really love Pop! OS for the fact that I've been able to get my faster internet speeds compared to the fairly old Wi-Fi that was built into my motherboard. But, the motherboard Wi-Fi works. It's just, not as fast as the newer stuff. So I'm really happy to have that working. Works great. So if you have like one of those wireless dongles that you're having issues with on some other Linux distributions, it may very well work here with Pop! OS. Now, I did have to run a lot of commands from the command line to install packages and get it integrated as a kernel module, but ran flawlessly. And that's another thing, once again, a kernel module, every time a kernel update happened, my Wi-Fi worked no problem. So they're doing things right here from that perspective with the Pop! OS. There's a lot of other things here that may or may not appeal to you. The power settings, pretty good. Displays, I like to mirror basically my monitor to my TV over there, and so you can mess around with that. A lot of little touches here. I'm not a big fan of nightlight, but if you're into that, where it basically gets a little warmer depending on what time of the day it is, that's something for you to consider. I could take it or leave it, and actually I left it. So that's the settings menu. Pretty full featured, and I left it. I think it was part of the dock initially, so I don't think I had to add it, but I may have. I can't remember, to be honest with you. So let me see here. One thing that I would like to talk about real quick is I have the Pop! OS website open in Firefox, and it's a pretty decent website. They're talking about things that you can do with Pop! OS, and tutorials and things of that nature. They talk about the computers they sell, because System 76 is a hardware company as well as an operating system company. In fact, they probably lean more to the hardware aspect because they probably want you to buy some of their computers. But one thing that I have noticed, and I guess they talk about the hybrid graphics thing here, depending on if you have a laptop or whatnot, that may be something beneficial to you. I don't have that capability with my computer, and I don't really know if that's anything I'd actually be interested in. But I have heard people talk about the hybrid graphics in, I'd say, high praise. I can't really comment on it, but that is a feature of the operating system. One thing, though, about their website, they talk about, the OS, and they have this right here, the Pop Docs, which is actually pretty good. There are some pretty decent articles in here, but, they don't have a good forum. They have this thing called Pop Chat, but you've got to go sign up for this Mattermost or whatever this is and create an account and log on. And I'm not a big fan of that. And I don't even know if that's really a forum, if it's so much as a chat room or something. So I'm not a big fan of that. I guess they just assume that you're going to go and use, say, like the Ubuntu forums. I think moving forward, that should be something that the System 76 team should look into, having a better forum system on their website, because with them starting to really diverge and distance themselves from the parent distro Ubuntu, they really need to have that support system, because for me personally, I feel the forums are always a good source of information in case you're trying to, you run across issues or you're trying to set something up. I've always had good luck going to the Ubuntu forums, and I think that it would benefit Pop! OS to have a good forum on their website, which they don't have at this point. The like I said, the docs, Pop docs, are actually pretty decent. And there's one thing I do remember finding here on the Pop docs, is like how to install other desktop environments. So if you're not a fan of GNOME, they do have information on how to install other desktop environments. The only issue with that is the fact that when it comes to installing other desktop environments, they sometimes don't play along well with each other. And when you have two or more desktop environments installed, then things start to overlap a lot and things get ugly. So I guess what I'm trying to say from that perspective, I think Pop! OS at its core may start to become a better Ubuntu than Ubuntu, because you have more recent kernels and you have, it seems like, more recent technology, comparatively speaking, to Ubuntu will hit Pop! OS before it does Ubuntu. And maybe if they had an option to download I guess you would call it a desktop neutral boot drive, and you could select which desktop environment you wanted to install, that might be a good thing moving forward. But I think they're really focused on pushing their Cosmic desktop, and that may be something like, moving forward, we'll see what happens there. If you prefer a different desktop environment, Pop! OS may not be the best choice for you, or if you do install that desktop environment, it may get very clunky and cluttered with extra software. So that's something to keep in mind for sure. Another issue with Pop! OS that I had, not really an issue so much, but it may be something that you may want to consider, is they do not install Grub by default with Pop! OS. Now, it's not a huge issue for me because I have two different SSDs. So if I do need to, for whatever reason, go to Windows, I'll just, hit the boot key and select that SSD when I'm booting up. And to be honest with you, I almost never boot into Windows. So it's not a huge issue for me. But if you are somebody who likes to dual boot and actually appreciates that Grub menu being available, by default, they don't install it. Now, can you install Grub? Probably. It's just I had no need to do it, so I didn't look into doing it myself. But it could be something that would give you a headache if you are trying to dual boot, Pop! OS and Windows. So that's something to keep in mind. During the installation process, they did try to default to encrypting the drive as well. They do let you, of course, turn that off, but by default, it's turned on. So that may be another consideration for you if you do like to try out different Linux distributions. the encrypted drives. The encrypted drives are probably more of a good security thing if you have, say, a laptop, but I'm not really a big fan of encrypted drives. I know there's certain people and security and whatnot. They try to promote encrypted drives. That's just something to keep an eye out for when you're installing Pop! OS, as to whether or not you want your drive encrypted, and if you don't, make sure to turn that off. So yeah, that's pretty much all my thoughts about Pop! OS. Like I said, I've used it probably between 3 and 4 months now because of some of the hardware issues I had, rather than the standard 2 months. I do like it. I think they're moving in a good direction. I'm still not really sold on the GNOME desktop environment. I'll be honest with you all. Um, this is the file manager. It works, but I just feel like other desktop environments have a better file explorer program. Basically, it works. It looks okay, and they did a good job of theming it with Pop! OS, but it's still at its base GNOME. A lot of the apps they have on here are GNOME apps, and now they did after I did my updates, they did add VLC Media Player, but it was still trying to launch MP4s basically with default GNOME thing, which I think is just called videos or something. And I had to go in there and right click and, well, actually, you know what? I don't have a video. So never mind. I don't know. There's still a lot of, these are some of the default programs. I did install Pinta for a little bit of video editing. Obviously, I installed Citra for the emulation, the Steam and whatnot. So they do have a pretty good set of default applications out of the box. They have the entire LibreOffice suite as well. I wouldn't say they have so much that I felt it was cluttered. I wouldn't call it a cluttered operating system. So I think out of the box, they have a good selection of default software. And then once you do get an update, they add like VLC, which is my preferred video player. So it's not cluttered, but I think it's a good selection of software out of the gate. There's the document. There it is right there. Document viewer and video. So I was right when I said the name. So I'm not a big fan of either of those two applications. I know some people like it. I'm just not a big fan of either of those applications. I'd much prefer Ocular for PDFs and VLC for video. But you can right click on a PDF and tell it open with Ocular rather than Document Viewer. So you can do that fairly easily, actually. So over my time of using Pop! OS, I'd say it's a very good operating system, very stable. I can't really think of any major issues I've had from a system locking up on me aspect. I mean, I did have a couple of times where video would get like locked and I wasn't able to do anything, but I was able to pull up a different terminal and reboot the system. So I can't say, if I had to do hard reboots, it's probably, I could count it on one hand how many times I had to do it. For the most part, the OS has been very stable and pretty good to use. Theming is, for the most part, pretty much consistent across the board, and I do like that. I just wish that I had a little more control over my theming and it wasn't so dark, because it can sometimes get hard to distinguish those different bars when they are doing that, which, wouldn't be an issue if that top taskbar was integrated into the bottom one. The same. Overall, though, I think Pop! OS is a great operating system, and I would look forward to seeing what they do in the future with their own custom-built Cosmic desktop and if they fix some of the issues that I have going forward, I would like to see what they do with that in the future. And I'd probably, I liked using Pop! OS. I really did. I'm not going. It's not perfect, but I would definitely probably give it at least a good 90, maybe even as high as 95% ranking score, because it's a good operating system. And if you and especially if you like the dark theme that you see here, you'll be fine with it. I almost forgot something. That was one thing about, and this once again not on the System 76 team, but if you have a dark theme, you can't use Variety for your wallpaper changer. You have to use a different program, and I completely forgot what that program is called. So that once again comes down to the GNOME team. So if you do like swapping your wallpapers out, you may, if you like the dark theme, you'll have to get a different wallpaper changer. Something to consider for sure. But yeah, I think Pop! OS, it's very highly ranked on the DistroWatch list. You hear about it being very highly ranked with Steam usage, and there's a good reason for it. It's a good, stable operating system, and if you like Ubuntu-based distros, kind of like I do, I think you really can't go wrong with it. It's definitely deserving of its place in the top mentioned Linux distributions out there, and definitely something you should give a try. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Pop! OS. I hope you enjoy watching this video, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.